Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to get to share some things with you today. As Anthony said, sort of my academic journey, my personal life, my professional roles have really centered around this question of what is health, both for us as individuals and in communities, particularly for healthcare providers, because that's sort of the bend that I've had. And so while my present scholarship is more focused on pedagogy and athletic training specifically, many of my presentations have kind of focused on other aspects of health, and that's kind of what brought me to this campus talk today. Um, it, Specifically, the two things that like are on my mind of how health and I are engaging right now is I'm doing a presentation with a colleague at our state professional meeting about caring for the caretaker. Um, and then I serve on our state's peer support team for athletic training professionals. So I have some training in critical incident stress management as well. Um, but today I'm really excited to chat with you just kind of broadly about what health is. I sort of envision this as a pretty interactive workshop. That's sort of my teaching style in general. And I think we all bring our own lived experiences, professional backgrounds, personal lives with us, and we can learn a lot from each other. So my goals here are to kind of describe health in its many dimensions, look specifically a little bit at social determinants of health, and then consider the role of spirituality and faith alongside health. And then there'll be a time at the end for sort of a true question and answer, but there'll be some spots along the way where I might pose some questions that I would love to hear responses for if you feel comfortable doing so. Um, Anthony kind of gave my bio, but a little bit about me. I just celebrated 10 years here at North Park on our faculty. I live nearby in the neighborhood with my husband Dave and our dog Sherlock. Um, and I kind of wanted to walk us through a little bit of like how I came to these questions and what this has looked like for me. Um, so I was at North Park as an undergraduate student. I then went to Ohio University to earn my post-professional degree in athletic training. And at the same time, I was working as a solo athletic trainer in Southeast Ohio, which is pretty rural. The school I was at was about 10 miles from the West Virginia border. And I always tell students it was interesting for me because I went from being at a small school in a big city to being at a really large university in a really small place. And so that experience really kind of shaped how I viewed the world and patient care and health and what that means. And so then when I started back at North Park on the faculty, I had these questions about like, well, how do we integrate faith? What does health mean? What are these? What am I interested in? And so I pursued a certificate in faith and health from the seminary. Um, and I realized that for me, faith was really personal and it was so interesting, but I didn't want it to be my academic focus. And so when I went on to my PhD, I sort of shifted gears back towards more health professions, specifically, how do we educate health professionals? Um, I think a lot of times in the healthcare professional world, we focus on the health and well-being of our patients. And I've actually had a lot of interest in how do we care for ourselves as the healthcare providers? What does that look like in terms of burnout and longevity? And what types of things can we do to make sure that we are healthy and whole so that we can provide healthy, whole care to patients? So that's sort of the background and the frame and the lens that I'm bringing into this conversation. And I tend to be a pretty not a lot of words on slides. I like to do more images and pictures and kind of see what that brings up for people. And I will acknowledge that there are lots of models to describe health as a multidimensional construct, so many models. And I've chosen to focus on a five-dimensional model, in part because I like being able to count on the five fingers and kind of use that with students. This particular one we use in our core curriculum personal health course at North Park. And that is in part because my late colleague John Yelm described this model in his textbook. And so that's sort of a long way to say, like, this is why you're seeing the image in front of you today. I like this image though, because it's pretty simple. There are some models that have fewer dimensions than this, some of which combine intellectual and emotional help into mental health and kind of look at those together. But I like that this kind of separates them. Other frameworks or models have more dimensions of health. They add in things like environmental health and financial health. And I think those are wonderful. But for me, they kind of pop in different places and they don't necessarily need their own standalone dimension. Using a multi-dimensional model sort of also acknowledges that there's both internal and external elements that influence our well-being. You've probably experienced that in your own life, right? There's things about your physiology or the way that you process information that influences your but there's also things from your community or your environments, whether that be really obvious, things like elevation or pollution, or things that are harder to describe, like a sense of belonging or a sense of safety. I also really like this model because it shows how all of these different dimensions overlap because they're not siloed, right? You can't talk about spiritual health without considering social health. You can't talk about emotional health without considering physical health. The ways that we see these overlaps in our individual lives might differ, and how strongly they overlap can be different. Um, but I love the interconnectedness. Um, and so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time here looking at sort of these these dimensions and what they might mean. People have gone in lots of different directions with lots of different descriptions. I think for a lot of people, physical health is what they think of when they think of health, right? What's your blood work like? How well is your cardiovascular system working? What does your nutritional status look like? how how able are you to do functional activities of every day, right? Those sorts of things. Many people also consider their emotional health, right? How are you processing feelings? How do you interact with people? What are your coping strategies? Intellectual health, for me, that's a lot about growth and development and challenging yourself and curiosity. Other people have described it more in terms of attainment, um, or how you process information. Social health, the interaction with different people and with our environments and what that looks like. And then spiritual health can look a lot of different ways depending on someone's faith tradition or lack of tradition. But the idea that there's a sense of belonging, that there's something greater than oneself in the world. Um, and so I just wanted to kind of, in case you weren't familiar with those different dimensions or you were looking for examples, I wanted to kind of create a little bit of a framework. But this is where I'm going to kind of toss it back to the group and have some questions just to ponder or to answer if you feel led. But what was your reaction or overall impression of this image or these dimensions?
Hello, my name is
Yes.
Maria. Thank you so much for sharing such a simple model about the health. I really, really love it. And I'm just having might be like some of the comment that we can apply also this model inside, outside, and between. So we can
Mm.
apply all of these dimensions. Yes. So that's the part I'm a psychotherapist, so I would love to use this definitely. You're absolutely right. First association when we hear health, we think about the physical health because I sometimes we talk about, okay, is this like a biological reason or is it a psychological reason when we go through some of the symptoms with my clients. So yeah, I would love to use this model because it definitely brings you have so many doors, you have so many kind of like different access to your well-being because health, it's definitely homeostasis and well-being. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved the image of like inside, outside, and between. That's something I hadn't thought of when I looked at this image before, and now I think that's going to sit with me for a while. Um, and I love that you brought up the connection between the emotional and physical because there's a fair amount of research that says that physical activity is good for emotional regulation to a point, right? There's ways where that doesn't, it's not the only thing you should be doing. Um, and I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get so caught up of like, well, what are my fitness goals or what what do I want my blood work to look like? And we put those sorts of pressures on people instead of thinking about, well, how can we cultivate a space where you want to be physically active because it makes you feel better in your body and it makes you better able to interact with the people around you.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. You just like bring me another idea about I one day I read from energy medicine one of the expression emotion is E, it means energetic motion. So
Oh.
all of our emotions moves our body. So it's we cannot just separate our emotions from the body because we feel all our emotions in the body. That's it. Yeah.
Uh, No, that's beautiful. Thank you. One of the books that I read recently was called Burnout, Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Amelia
Yes,
and
yes, I did it. I did it. Oh my God, I fell in love with that book. Yeah,
uh,
Nagoski,
yeah,
twin
Nagoski.
sister
Yeah,
Nagoski, Amelia and Amelia, Emily and Amelia.
thank you. Yeah, I would say if for those of you that aren't familiar, that's a wonderful book
Oh
that
my
talks
God.
about how we store emotions in our bodies and how, especially in the industrialized world that we live in now, um, we don't complete the stress cycle and the difference between stressors and stress and how your stressor might still be there, but you need to move through the whole stress cycle so that your body realizes it's safe and it can return to homeostasis instead of living in this heightened sort of tense space. And how if you don't move through the stress cycle, it can increase cortisol and impact sleep and lots of other things. So not to get too much off topic, but thank you for bringing that up. Are there other reactions to this image or this idea of health being multidimensional?
Yeah, I would say my reaction is like it's a simple image, but describes something very, very complex that we cannot compartmentalize ourselves and just say, yeah, I'm having, oh, I'm in pain or I feel sick, but that there are all these other elements that are a part of that are causes in that. And so it's just so feels impossible to kind of find a single cause to anything, and that holistic care should be the norm.
Yes, absolutely. And I love the idea of like we think of health as simple, right? Because it's something that you learn or really early on, right? We give language to it early on, but because it has so many different facets, it can be really hard to describe. It can be really hard to navigate. It changes across the course of your life, both your understanding and the expression of health within your embodied self. And so, yeah, I can nerd out for a long time about health. Any other reactions that we want to share? Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind. This idea that health is multidimensional as we're going to go on to another related topic and something that like I've spent more time on in recent years. So when I first started at North Park, I taught a lot of our personal health courses, and I spent a lot of time with this multidimensional model of health, describing it to students, having them navigate it, talking about how it shows up and what it looks like. And in the past few years, I've shifted my focus to learning about, looking more at social determinants of health. So my colleague, Dr. Allison Warfel, who teaches in my department, and I have presented on this topic at both state and regional professional meetings. And like the dimensions of health, considering social determinants provides a broader view of the concept of health. But it also helps put health into context as something that is tied to history and policy and economics and a lot of the more external factors. So while the dimensions of health think about both internal and external, and the social determinants of health think about both internal and external, if I had to kind of separate them, I'd say the dimensions of health are a little bit more focused on the individual level, and social determinants of health are focus a little bit more on the corporate level or how your context impacts your health as a person. So I chose to use the lens of Healthy People 2030 because I think, again, this image is really simple. I didn't do it intentionally, but this also has 5 things. So kind of lumping it in groups so that we could talk about it. And when you look at Healthy People 2030, each of the categories listed here has a specific goal. So for healthcare access and quality, the goal is to increase access to comprehensive, high quality healthcare services. For education access and quality, the goal is to increase educational opportunities and help children and adolescents do well in school. For economic stability, the goal is to help people earn steady incomes that allow them to meet their health needs. Social and community context is to increase social and community support. And neighborhood and built environment, the goal is to create neighborhoods and environments that promote health and safety. And while those goals are important and good, I think it's also helpful to conceptualize what this means or how these categories may show up. And so I'm going to give you some different either questions or things to consider that relate to each of these determinants. So for healthcare access and quality, I feel like this is the one that gets a lot of airtime. Because people think about, okay, can I go see a provider? What is the quality of the place that I can go? But I want us to also consider that it includes things like wait times, preventative care and recommended screenings, the types of providers and hospital systems or clinics that you have available to you, whether that's based on geography or insurance or transportation or the language that you speak. So it's more than just like that patient provider interaction. It's all of the other things about our healthcare system that make it easy or not easy for people to get the care that they need. For education access and quality, well, at first glance, many people think about educational attainment and level of education, which is fine. This category also emphasizes things like early childhood education, safety in schools, incorporation of prevention and intervention services within schools, like occupational therapy, speech language pathology, mental health services, more of those wraparound services that particularly children need when they're developing. Economic stability. This goes beyond just salary and begs us to consider the seasonality of someone's employment, the availability of jobs, how likely a work-related injury might occur, what benefits they have available to them, how their economics impact food and housing insecurity. So not just the employer-employee relationship, but all of the things that help us consider that money often grants us access to health in different ways. And how can we make and how does that influence someone's holistic health or healthcare? For social and community context, this can take a variety of forms, but it makes me think about belonging. So things like family systems, faith communities, volunteer organizations, knowing your neighbors. Do you have organizations? Do you have those third spaces where you can go and feel known and seen and loved and cared for? And the neighborhood and built environment. For this one, I always like to ask questions like, do you feel safe outside? Do you have good lighting in your neighborhood? What's the air quality like? Is your water safe to drink? Do you have sidewalks? Are there trees and or other plants? Do you have access to the internet? Do you have easy access to public transportation, right? Other things that can make it easy or harder to get healthcare services, or to feel a sense of belonging, or to meet people around you. So again, I've been talking for a little while. I would love to turn it back to the group and say, there's a couple different ways you could react to this. Either what's your previous experience talking about social determinants of health, or what's your impression, if this is maybe your first time or one of your first times thinking about how different social determinants could influence health. Any impressions?
I think for me, if we like compare the last slide and this slide, I feel like the intersection kind of reminds me of Maslow's like hierarchy of needs. Like you can't get to the next level without having the level before like satisfied. So like if someone doesn't have access to like economic stability or like maybe like the neighborhood like infrastructure, they might not be able to access like the same healthcare and like the same quality as like someone who does. So I think that that's the relationship that I see. I'm not sure how you feel about that comparison.
No, I think that's great. Thinking about Maslow's hierarchy, right? If your basic needs aren't met, it's hard to think beyond that. So if you're worried about, like if you're dealing with food insecurity, right, you're not thinking about necessarily a well-balanced diet. You're just trying to have enough calories to survive, right? And so kind of thinking about the interplay of those things. Absolutely. Other reactions? Okay, so then my last concept I kind of want to look at is looking at spirituality and faith. Um, and so as I was completing my faith and health certificate at North Park Seminary, I spent a lot of time considering the parallels between spirituality and health. And we'll get to some of those parallels in a second. But the three things, like words that really stuck with me, and that I wanted to offer to you today, are thinking about shalom, wholeness, and health and the relationship between them. So, shalom, some of us might be super familiar with that terms, other of us may not be. And maybe you have some preconceived notions about what it is. Um, the three ways I've heard it described are as peace, as wholeness, and as restoration. And to me, the idea of shalom kind of bookends the Old and New Testament, right? That God created people and the world good, right? That wholeness at the beginning, and the redemption and the resurrection story of bringing things to right, or the restoration that happens because of the life, death, and rising of Jesus. So sort of that bookend of thinking about shalom as not just peace, but as that continuum of wholeness and restoration. Then there's the idea of wholeness that shows up lots of places in the Bible. The one that I'm going to reference is in the Shema, um, which shows up a couple places, but the place I'm going to reference is Deuteronomy 6, 4-6. So the text reads, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These words which I am commanding you today will be on your heart. And then in the New Testament, Jesus does a callback to the Shema and talks about loving God with all of our very, or all of our everything. And the thing that I think is really interesting, well, there's two things that I wanted to draw attention to. The first is this identification of heart and soul and mind and strength, and how that to me relates to the dimensions of health, right? You can see parallels between the ways that we embody that wholeness. And that wholeness is not just physical wholeness, but it's thinking, and you can draw parallels in several different ways. But to me, right, strength representing that physical wholeness, the mind representing more of the intellectual wholeness, the heart representing more of the emotional wholeness, and the soul representing more of the spiritual wholeness, right? And so this idea that it's a wraparound sort of wholeness. But the other thing that's interesting is that wholeness in the Shema has the same root word as health. So they both come from this, and I might butcher it because I'm not a Hebrew linguist, but I always describe it as Hal, Hal. Hal describes both wholeness and health. And so I sort of like this continuum of that shalom leads us to wholeness, and wholeness shares a root with health. And so there's this combination or this intersection of all of those things. And so again, I'm going to kind of throw it back to the group because I'm curious, what are your reactions to the words shalom or wholeness? Before, if you heard me talk, if you had heard those words, what would you think of?
For me personally, shalom, my first reaction was salim. Salim in language means greetings. When you see someone, you just say salim. And shalom, that was my first impression, first reaction. And then when you said wholeness, I thought like, oh my God, the first image about the different dimensions is that's the wholeness. And when we are feeling that we are whole, it's definitely makes sense. It leads to the homeostasis and health. All of that elements, but also personal, I think not all of us spiritual or faithful or religious. I think it's just definitely this concept is sometimes could be a very abstract concept because not everyone is intellectual, not everyone into this image, as you said, everyone has different educational level. And I think this concept for us, it means like so many different components and how they're connected, interconnected. There is such a deep complexity to understand the health itself. And I think it's could be it's definitely not going to resonate to everyone. I think so. Yeah, that's my reaction.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing. And I love the idea of shalom as greeting and how, right, of the idea of like greeting something with like wholeness or restoration or like this idea of like, I'm hoping the best for you or like be well or take care or I'm recognizing your humanity in that. So I think that's really lovely. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in here? Okay, so we kind of talked about three distinct things, and I want to try to tie it together a little bit. So, again, this is just my interpretation, and you may walk away with a completely different sense of how these relate to each other. But when I think about faith and when I think about well-being, I view them both as relational terms. Relationships within oneself, as well as relationships with the outside world. And because they're relationships, they evolve over time, right? So if you look at corporate faith traditions, they've evolved over centuries. If you look at individual faith expressions, they change over the course of someone's life. Both of which are impacted by the outside world and by the people who are interacting. Well-being also evolves, right? Your understanding of what well-being means or what your goals are or what that looks like for you can change. The understanding of the interplay between the different dimensions can play. And so that's something that I've appreciated in my own journey is watching my understanding both on an intellectual level as well as in an lived experience level change with both faith and well-being over time. And then the intersection between the two of them has changed as well. To me, both faith and well-being are journeys, right? They're not something that you arrive to or you achieve. Health is not stagnant, and you're not like, "Oh, I have well-being, and you can never take it away." Well-being evolves; it changes. They're both influenced by many aspects of life. Again, both individual and corporate. And so I love that there's that parallel of they're both journeys. They both change. Now, the other thing that I think they offer us is the idea that both faith and well-being have both individual meaning, right? What faith and well-being mean to me might be different than what they mean to you. But then there's also corporate context in which those can be looked at, right? A faith community and what well-being looks like within that. the well-being, not just for me, but for my community. And so thinking about the things that I can do to improve that, whether that be on a small scale or a large scale. And so that's the place where I think the dimensions of health and the social determinants of health sort of intersect in my mind to then sort of cause change, or to help improve well-being more generally. So this is my last set of questions, which is what's been your experience considering faith and well-being in corporate context, so outside of yourself, but in communities or in groups, or what's been your lived experience of the relationship between faith and well-being? So I know those are both pretty personal questions, so I don't want anyone to feel like they have to share, but I would love to open it up to see if anyone would like to share.
Hey, Dr. Anderson.
Hi.
Hi, this is Ethan Carnes. And I really loved what you were talking about. One of the things I was thinking of in what you were sharing was parenting. And as a dad, one of the parenting like models that I've chosen to adopt is conscious discipline. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's um, there's a concept in it by Dr. Becky Bailey, I think is the name who wrote it. Anyway, so the idea is of wishing someone well. And so what she does is you can you can actually like stand in front of somebody and look at them and say, "I wish you well today." And when you do that and you have that eye contact, it releases endorphins in your body, and you can see the person's pupils dilate as you do it. And so it's a really powerful like parenting tool. But I've also found like as far as faith and well-being, that it's a really helpful thing to like regulate bodies and emotions with children. But also it speaks to a spirituality as well, right? Like that it's not necessarily religious, but you can be a religious person and practice it.
Mm. Well, and I think too, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I was trying to leave faith and spirituality pretty broad because they have so many different expressions. And I love that you were like wishing someone well. Like there's some faith in that, right? There's some hope and some connection and belonging that's coming from that. And if you think about spirituality specifically as just like seeing something outside of yourself, I think that sentiment really, really carries well. So thank you. Any other reactions?
About the reaction, I just want to continue what Ethan just said. So just general, our personal well-being, because we kind of separate individual and corporate well-being, kind of like a little bit. But from the nervous system perspective, there is no individual well-being without other human beings. That's it. As Ethan said about when you say, like as I said, like in even like I came from Islam religion, but right now I'm spiritual. So assalamu alaikum, it means I wish you peace. You peace. That means the greeting is so important, and the eye contact. And when you said like endorphins, I literally imagine and I felt that flow because even the tone of the voice brings so much information. So I think our own well-being always in that chain and in that connection with other human beings around us. And
Absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely. And I so appreciate you honing in on that. And I think particularly in Western societies, we're not good at acknowledging that, right? We like to be individuals. And so it's hard to say, it's not just about me. My well-being is wrapped up in the well-being of the people around me in lots of different ways. Um, from the physiological to the like political to the economic, all of the things, they're interrelated. So thank you. Okay, so I put together a very short reading list. It was hard for me to kind of narrow down what I wanted to put on here. And as we've mentioned, there's a few other people and books and things that got brought up that I think would be amazing to add to this list. Um, but these, I will also say, a lot of these are just things that I've read over the past year. And so while I didn't necessarily build the presentation off of them, I think they really informed my perspective as I was preparing for today. So I just wanted to share those. And then I just wanted to open it up for general questions and answers of whether it's about me or my discipline or the topic. I hope that's okay. Um, I'm not.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm open. If there's whatever um, related things we want to talk about, I'm open to answer those things.
Can I ask about, I'm just curious about your perspective because you're working with athletes, and I'm curious about your experience implementing this knowledge. And it's, as we talked about, it's very complex. How do you apply um, this concept with athletes?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I will answer this in two ways. So most of my work is preparing athletic training students to enter the profession. And so I talk a lot with them about caring for themselves as a provider. So what does it look like to have healthy coping strategies? What does it look like to know what your resources are for yourself, um, in lots of different facets? Um, Talking to them about their values, like what do you value? And reminding them, like, I'm not here to judge your values. That's not my role, but my role is to help facilitate you figuring out what's important to you and then trying to align your career goals to that. I was responding to a discussion board this morning where we were talking about like what are the athletic training profession's values and what are your values and where are they very aligned and where do you have some nuance? And so that's part of it. When I work clinically, I do some part-time work in Chicago Public Schools as a substitute athletic trainer. And so really just like trying to be mindful of the social determinants of health when I do that work. And so asking students about, well, how are you getting home today? Like, what is your transportation situation? Who would you like me to call to talk about the injury that you've received? So being a little bit more broad and thoughtful about how I interact with their whole reality, not just the injury that's in front of me. Um, and then I think trying to get students or patients to understand like there's this intersection, right? You're wondering why you don't feel good. Well, have we talked about your sleep? Have we talked about your emotional well-being? Have we talked about the exams that you have coming up and how that, is increasing your cortisol and your stress levels and how that might be inhibiting your body's ability to get better a little bit. Asking about their support systems and what does that look like and how can, especially in a trying moment when you're battling back from an injury or an illness, can you rely on those people around you? So I went a lot of different directions and I really appreciate the question, but did I answer it?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. It was
Okay,
very informative. I really love it, what you do.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions that I can answer? I also just want to say, just sort of like my place here. So I teach in our exercise science and athletic training programs. And I would say our exercise science program has a little bit more of a health informed bend than some exercise science programs do. And within our larger like divisional group, we also have physical education and the health sciences. And so I'm just really appreciative that I get to work alongside colleagues who are really invested in health in all of its facets, not just in how our physical bodies are healthy, but how us as whole persons can be healthy. And to be at an institution that kind of acknowledges the whole spectrum and the whole what wholeness really means. And it's not just a physical person, but it's all of the things and experiences that make that person up too.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for example, what's the youngest age for like bringing this concept would be useful? Because how is this age appropriate? I know that you can simplify, but
Mhm.
it's a very complex, I mean, concept. So I'm just curious about the age. What's the age you would just advise to,
Ooh.
and then explore, and do all of this?
I think that's a really hard question, and it brings me back to Ethan's point about parenting and how like a lot of parenting is getting kiddos to understand the things that make them up, and how the choices that they make can influence their well-being. So I think there's probably some age appropriate things at a really young age, right? Like early childhood type stuff of like when you eat this, this is how your body feels. When you move your body, this is how you feel. When you get a hug from someone that you feel safe with, this is how you feel. The youngest age that I've really given this sort of a talk to was high school students, and really trying to be like, hey, your health matters, and it matters in this sort of overarching, all-consuming way that you might not acknowledge. And I would say traditionally, like um, in educational settings, when we have health classes, they don't always get to all of these parts. They focus on the physical health part and maybe the emotional health part, but they don't necessarily consider all of the pieces. Um, so I think I don't know that I would deliver it in the same way to all age groups, but I would definitely say like you start small because as I said, like health is a journey. Your understanding evolves. Um, I'll give a shout out. My middle sister has a degree in child development and family science. And so she's like my early child expert. I'm like, hey, how would you describe this to a kiddo? She's like, you read them a book about it, right? Or you like do something play-based that they can understand. Um, but I personally don't have that giftedness. You don't want to put me around super young ones to talk about this specifically.
Hey, Joy here.
Hi, Joy.
Hey, question about how you can get through your entire syllabus context within one course and deal with this. And I'll
Oh,
turn off again.
yeah. Well, it depends on the course. So the personal health course that we offer for I should say most undergraduate students. So undergraduate students at North Park either have to take a stress and health course or a personal health course. And in that course, it's 2 semester hours, and the goal is really focusing on the dimensions of health and the interplay of that. And each instructor does it in a slightly different way. So that one's sort of, I would say, easier because like that's the goal. In a course where I have more content, um, and it's trying to prepare healthcare providers, it's sort of one of those things that like pops up in small bits in each of my courses where it's like a callback. It's like reminding people that. So one of the ways that I do it is when I teach about patient-centered care, we talk about like what are you bringing into the room, and how does the way that you show up influence how your patients perceive what you're doing and how they relate to you. Um, or when we talk about like professional development, we talk about, okay, but what does that look like in trying to have longevity in the profession and reducing burnout and having um, sort of the tools to identify burnout and know what resources you need. And so And those, thankfully, we have a whole curriculum for the athletic training program. And so it sort of pops up in a few places along the way. So it's not like one course is just devoted about it, but it's, for me, it's more like this is a lens by which I teach information, is thinking about, well, how do we think about health as the foundation for everything that we're doing? Did I answer your question, Joy?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
just, as you know, curriculums are tight and you have very little time.
And I
That's all.
think too, the other way I will say it is that as much as I can, I try to model it for students,
Right.
right? So trying to set boundaries and being really clear, like even when I go over my syllabus, I'm like, I will not respond to your email after 8 p.m. or on Sundays. Like
Right.
that's my Sabbath. I'm taking that day off. I will respond very promptly outside of those hours, but just know from like 8 p.m. to 7 a.m., like you're not hearing from me unless you have an exam the next day. And then sometimes I'll go a little bit later and check on them. But I think that like modeling what that can look like is can be really helpful too. I
Thanks.
don't always get it right. I will say that. I'm not perfect. It's a journey, remember.
Yep. Thanks.
Any last minute questions before I turn it back over to Anthony?
Thank you so much for your work. It's very, very, very important topic.
I was going to say, thank you all so much for being here and for engaging. I know sometimes when you're on a Zoom call with strangers, it can be hard to pipe up and say things. And I learned some things today and like have some new reading materials that I'm going to go read. So I'm really appreciative. So, and then Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for joining us today. We really appreciate your work and your insight and the things you had to share with us today. We do